Well, this week we're picking up sort of where we left off last week.
And that was a job?
The engine shop here on the logging railroad, the single stall engine shop, is turning out to be a 3-part video.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so this is the middle part.
Yeah.
You built this power meter.
Well, I've been to a lot of model railroads, and they have power, but they don't have meters.
Right, and in this scale, we can get away with it. And you built these shelves and this stove.
Got to have a messy shelf in a locomotive repair shop there.
Absolutely, absolute filth and grime everywhere. And I put glass in the windows.
Yes, and I notice it's clean.
Well, it took me all of 10 minutes, so
well.
No big deal. The big project this week, though, has been getting the roof on the building.
Oh, that has been a project.
My goodness, my goodness. There are 7 of these really large roof trusses. And the kind of interesting thing with these roof trusses is the bottom part stays with the building, because that's where all the wiring and electrical and lighting goes. And then the top part here stays with the roof. And that way we can lift the roof off when we need to get inside because of a derailed locomotive or something like that without disrupting the wiring. So these roof trusses split right in half, right through that section right there. So the first thing I needed to do is build the seven
The 7 trusses.
the 7 bottom parts of the trusses. Now, I was having a hard time figuring out the angles here, so I decided to go with the same plan that they're using over at SpaceX.
Oh.
Build it and see if it blows up, and then if it does, do something different.
Well, there you go. I was never good at algebra either.
No, so I just went ahead and built some of these, and when I finally got the angles right, I said, okay, make up 7 of those.
There you go.
So, and they're different right for left, so there's that little problem too. Because the trusses are asymmetrical, because this building is right up against the backdrop. So the back wall is taller than the front wall, and the front part has eaves and the back part doesn't. So these trusses are asymmetrical, and that adds a little complexity to the problem.
Yes, because that was intentional.
That was intentional. But it does add some complexity. I used the my favorite go-to thing here, Watco Walnut Stain.
There you go.
And that stains them very, very dark. And then I came back and distressed them with the edge of a saw blade. You use all kinds of different things.
Oh, I use the little scraper things off from like wax paper that you just pull those off and they're free.
Yeah, and that works great. Anything with a serrated edge to it. I used my Zona saw, because this saw has very wide teeth.
Right.
And given the size of these beams and everything, I thought the distressing looked best dragging the edge of my Zona saw across there. And I thought these turned out quite nice. This also really lightens up the color.
It does.
Because it brings out more of the natural wood color. And I really like the look of that. I was very happy with the way the 7 of these turned out. Took them over to the paint booth and airbrushed in a little soot from the locomotive.
There you go.
Because the locomotive would be throwing all kinds of soot up into the rafters here, hopefully not setting fire to the building.
Oh, let's hope not.
But I wanted to get some soot on there, and I think that has a nice natural locomotive shop look to it right there. Now the covering, the outside layer, is going to be plywood, but I found this incredibly thin plywood. It's 1/32 of an inch.
Oh, good.
Which is less than a millimeter, way less than a millimeter. But everything up here has to be super lightweight. The building is built out of balsa wood, and the roof is built out of this, because I have to be able to carry these structures up and down ladders.
Yeah.
Because the stuff's way up in the mountains.
Right.
So one of the principal design goals in building all of this was to make it super lightweight. And this building, the whole building together with windows and everything, barely weighs a pound.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually really easy to move around. All of this has to be checked for clearances and whatnot by putting the plywood in place, because the top half of the trusses have to line up with the bottom half of the trusses, and the plywood has to sit flat to the whole thing.
Oh, gee.
Anyway, I'm now ready to build the top half of the trusses, making sure that they stay in alignment with the lower half and the plywood. Now that top structure, that beam that goes across the top, I wasn't planning on putting it there, but the only way I could hold everything in alignment was to add this beam.
Oh dear.
So I thought, well, okay, it's a structural element now. I'm going to add this beam just so that I can get all of my my trusses straight so that the plywood goes on there correctly, which it does.
Nice.
Surprised me.
Oh.
So from inside here, you can see how everything fits together. The bottom half of the truss, the upper half of the truss, and then the plywood, which will mount to the top part of the trusses here. And then the whole plywood and top part of the truss can be lifted off, leaving behind the lower part of the truss, and more importantly, all the lighting and wiring.
Oh, good deal.
So I attached the rear piece of plywood to this structure because I could do that with the roof trusses and everything in place, again, to make sure that everything stays in alignment. And then I could bring this entire structure over to the workbench and put the other side on over there. But first I needed to double check. You can kind of see where it comes apart there. And then here's adding the other side. Over at the workbench, because now I don't have to check alignment because I know everything fits. And now all I have to do is attach the other piece of plywood and then stain the whole thing.
Oh, that's neat.
And then I had to come back and re-stress a lot of these things because it's too dark of a color now and it's not going to look good. And then shoot some soot up in here too. And hopefully the locomotive isn't going to set fire to anything.
No way.
And here's the fire prevention device. It's called a smoke jack.
Oh, okay.
And you park the locomotive underneath this. This is what a real smoke jack looks like.
Oh, nice.
Is that beautiful?
Those are neat.
I wish we were there.
I do too.
It's somewhere in Europe, Germany, France, I don't know just what. But this is the smoke jack I fell in love with. I said, I'm going to copy that one right there. But look at that. It looks not like a roundhouse, but like a locomotive cathedral.
Yes.
Look at those beautiful windows back there and the high ceilings. And notice that the turntable pit is just barely in front of the engines here. It's got an indoor turntable.
Oh, that's wild. Wow.
What a neat roundhouse. Sigh. Anyway, what we need to do now is build this exact smoke jack or something very, very, very similar to it for the little single stall engine house up in the mountains. So off to Home Depot.
Yes. Parts.
Parts. Over to the plumbing department. You do some of your best creative work in the plumbing department.
I don't see plumbing parts. I see all kinds of craft parts.
And now as I'm looking at this, I'm seeing a boiler on a steam donkey. But for now, it's going to be the smoke jack. So I had to silver solder these two connections together. And that requires using a torch. I'd still be there trying to get heat into it if I was using my usual technique of a soldering iron. So fired up the torch, soldered that together. Then I built this cap for the roof jack, and it
didn't work.
It fell apart.
Yes, because it was part of my old glue bottle, and because the glue doesn't stick to the bottle, the glue doesn't stick to the bottle.
So you just suddenly cobbled this thing together.
I had a dream, and I woke up and I had to come in and make a prototype, and then I actually implement it.
Yeah, it's all made out of actual sheet metal. It looks like the real thing because it's built just like the real thing.
Built out of metal, yes.
Yeah. Now, the bottom part of the smoke jack is the top of an oil bottle.
Yes, my fuel injector cleaner.
Anyway, I shot Eastwood Self-Etching primer on the whole thing. This is my new favorite primer. It took a while to find a proper replacement for the flow quill that I have been using, but this is some awesome stuff. Eastwood's Self-Etching Primer Gray. It really grabs a hold of metal.
Oh, that's good.
Almost anything can prime plastic, but when you're trying to put a decent primer onto a brass engine or something like that, I've always used flow quill. This is my new replacement product, Eastwood Metal Etching Self-Etching Primer. I love how it goes on. It's a rattle can, so it does tend to go on kind of thick. But you just have to be sort of careful with that. But look how nice and smooth.
Oh, no kidding.
So I love this stuff, and this is my brand new go-to primer, especially over anything metal, because it really gets a hold of metal in a really nice way. Now I've added a support structure at the bottom there, and that will help anchor it to the roof trusses once it is permanently mounted here. But for now, just test fitting everything to the roof, and so far so good.
Yes.
It goes right into the hole, and then the height was critical here because we can't have the locomotives running into it.
No, that would be not good.
And surprised me. Everything lines up and works just fine. So I took the thing outside and I rattle canned some flat black up inside there because it should have soot.
Yes, definitely.
And I do all the rattle canning outside instead of in the paint booth. Then I added a hint of silver. I wanted to get kind of a silvery galvanized look, and I again used a rattle can, but I stayed back about 3.5 feet so that I just kind of misted some silver on top of the primer, and to get this kind of galvanized look.
Right.
No one will ever see that because it's up inside the rafters, but I was having some fun with it anyway. And then I got the first basic coat of soot on here over in the paint booth. And then ready to mount that to the roof.
Neat.
And then I can go ahead and put in the little lateral truss rods that hold the whole thing to the rafters. So these rods are just pieces of K&S brass wire.
Oh, okay.
And I drilled some holes here through the little support structure on the smoke jack. And then just to give it a more finished look, I slipped a 0.90 nut over the end of the rod.
Well, there you go.
It's not screwed on there. You can see it's just held in place with a tiny drop of super glue. But it gives it a nice finished look.
It does.
And I was very happy with how that turned out. So the entire smoke jack is pretty much ready for permanent install. I went ahead and glued the truss rods in place and glued the smoke jack to the roof structure. And there it is, the finished smoke jack. So you built these shelves.
Oh, it's got to have shelves in there.
It's very crowded.
Yes.
So you couldn't do a whole lot, but I love you just started cobbling together some junk shelves.
Yes, just leftover parts and pieces from my crafts and printer. I go on the internet and print things off and then cut them out.
Well, we got plenty of junk boxes around here.
Oh, yeah.
Full of all kinds of little castings and bits and pieces
Sure.
and just odds and ends.
Yep, they're fun.
So this is the odds and ends shelf.
That's right.
And it turned out really quite nice. Now we can't mount it in place just yet because I haven't built the floor.
No.
But then you also put together this wood stove.
Yes, it's got to have a little pot-bellied stove, and I made the chimney from flexible straw.
And then what? The stove is carved wood, right?
It's carved balsa, so it's lightweight, and then just some square brass wire for the legs and the trim.
And again, all very lightweight because, again, it all has to be picked up and moved easily around. But doesn't it look neat looking through the windows?
Yes.
Because that's really the only way you can see any of this stuff when the building is in place is just like this, peer through the windows and see what's going on. I had thought about doing some skylights to let in more light, but since we're going to have really nice electrical lighting,
yes,
I figured we can peer through the door and
that's
windows.
right.
And we should have no trouble at all seeing it because here we are with the roof in place and you can see just fine. Okay, on to electrical.
Yes, I see you're doing knob and tube.
Yeah, I wanted to do not just knob and tube, but fully functional prototype knob and tube.
There you go.
So I started off by building the knob and tube. These things are slightly oversized.
But as small as we could get under
But
the
small,
circle.
yeah. So you can see that they're about 8 millimeters.
Right.
Which makes them a little bit larger than a true knob and tube in scale. But that way we can see what we're doing.
Yes.
Because it is important to see what you're doing when you're doing this really tiny, small, tweaky, teeny work. Thank God we had cataract surgery.
I have nothing to say.
We both got our eyeballs rebuilt just a little while back.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do any of this work. But you went ahead and built the power meter.
I did, and that was fun to do.
You blew everybody's mind with this. We posted it to Facebook.
Right, exactly. I just got an idea. It needed a power meter, and so it's actually a blister off from a pill pack, like for an allergy pill.
Perfect.
And then I printed the meter off on the internet, and then had to scale it way down on the printer.
Well, and as it happens, over at the pinball machine, we've got an old power meter hanging on the wall.
And that's the same one.
And that's the prototype.
Yeah, yeah.
So you were able to take measurements and figure the whole thing out. And there's what it looks like sitting in place on the building.
That's right. And that is jewelry wire, craft wire. If you pinch it down hard enough, you can actually drill a tiny hole through it for put the tag on it, and the meter box and the breaker.
And the breaker. The fuse box.
The fuse box.
They didn't have breakers.
No.
So this is a fuse box with a shut-off switch.
Yes.
And once again, we have some prototype here in the garage.
Yes, so 2 seed beads are the fuses.
So this is the wiring you put together for the casting machine.
I know, I'm not very good at it, am I?
Well, there were a couple of small fires.
I know, and
but overall it works.
Yeah, it does.
You just latch that knife switch closed and the casting machine comes on.
Right.
And about
Ignore the smoke.
1 out of 3 times the fuse blows.
But I didn't get my electrician's license just yet. I worked on it.
So anyway, this was kind of the prototype for the fuse box that's going on the Locomotive shop, and there it is.
Yeah.
Green fuses. So
yes.
What is that? 40 amp?
Yeah,
something like that.
Something like, yeah.
2-wire 40 amp.
Yeah, there you go.
Oddly enough, all of this is actually hooked up to power.
It is.
Because again, I'm trying to do fully functional knob and tube wiring, so it was my goal that all of this wire would work, except that the current is running the other way around. The meter's at the tail end of the whole thing, and the power runs down to the meter.
That's weird.
Because we haven't yet figured out how to get power into the input.
Oh, I'm working on it.
But we may set a power pole. The only reason we haven't set a power pole is we have to be able to lift this whole thing down, and that means that the power pole also has to be removable. But that shouldn't be too tough to figure out.
No, it wasn't tough to do that at all, and I've got 2 other connections just for it.
Anyway, there it is, all mounted, and we will probably add a power pole. Little touch-up paint here.
Yep.
And the electrical system is good to go.
And you'll get this tiny little power bill.
Tiny little power bill comes in a little microscopic envelope. Now, I built some overhead lighting, and it all fell apart. So you just grabbed some more sheet metal, and away you went.
That was after we tore up Michael's and Home Depot looking for something that would work. And some of it did. I was able to use the washers and the tube.
Yeah, you found some bits and pieces from parts that we had scavenged from other places, and then you just put together the light.
More craft wire.
Now, I had to figure out how to mount those lights into the rafters up here. Again, they have to mount in the lower part of the rafter so that the top part can still lift off. So I came up with this solution, these 2 beams that sit on top of the lower trusses, and then the lights mount to the 2 beams.
That worked out well.
As does the knob and tube wiring. It all mounts to these lower parts of the trusses, and then that way we can just lift the roof right off for working on it or whatever else. Okay, over to the paint booth now and get a little bit of color just on the top parts of these.
Right.
Because I'm not going to mess with the bottom. I like them being silver just like they are.
That should help put out more light.
A little more Eastwood primer, and then come back with a few layers of green. I wanted it to look like green enameling.
Yes.
Which would be kind of glossy, but I decided that between the smoke and the bird filth and whatnot that would end up on the tops of these. Anyway, I came back and did a little weathering, although I was pretty happy with just the green enamel look.
Right.
That looks pretty real. Okay, on to the knob and tube wiring.
There it is.
So I went ahead and installed my knobs and tubes on top of my beams.
Yes.
And now the way knob and tube originally worked is you have these little insulators that poke up with a little knob on the top, and that forms a space there to hold your wire, and you bring your wire up to the insulator, take a wrap around it, and continue on to your next insulator.
Exactly, because that wire was not insulated. It was bare wire.
Yeah, I think some of it was insulated for a while, but it was just cloth, and it would fall off rapidly, and the mice would eat it and so on. So the insulators here were designed to keep the wires from touching either each other or anything else.
Right.
So there it is, knob and tube wiring. And then, again, it runs all the way down to the power meter and the outside lighting, and that gives us this looks like Frankenstein's laboratory.
It looks like knob and tube to me.
Which looks like Frankenstein's laboratory.
Different.
But over here, then the wiring goes to the outside lighting and over to the power meter. And that brings on the lights outside.
Yes.
And even lights up the power meter.
Yes, a little bit does.
And there's actual power over here at the power meter. So if we do connect up to the pole, instead of the power going from the pole into the building, it'll be going from the building up into the pole.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. But that way we can put a street light over there.
That's right.
Here's how the power actually gets in. So at the far end of the knob and tube, I just brought the wires on either side of a beam and into that piece that sits up against the backdrop, which is just foam core. Mm-hmm. And then ran the wiring down the back side of the foam core, and that connects to an electrical connector so the whole thing can be unplugged when the building needs to be lifted down. And there it is.
There it is.
Fully functional. I now had to add the light bulbs.
Yes, that was a bit of a trick.
Not too bad.
You had to find the right size that fit down through the tube. And
I tried an LED at first. Didn't care for the look at all. So we ran over to the train shop and grabbed a pack of 12-volt light bulbs, and I stuck those down through here. A nice warm light.
Yes.
Looks really, really nice lighting up the shop down below. And all I had to do was just cut the wires back a bit and strip them back. And then because it's all bare wire, I just soldered the connections to the knob and tube. Piece of cake.
Yes.
And it looks great.
It's perfect.
I'm thrilled.
I am too.
Okay, so electrics are all in. Smoke jack is all in. Roof trusses are all built. Roof section is all built. Now I need to add something to the roof section, and that would be the fascia boards and the frieze boards.
Okay.
And then those, of course, have to be painted to match the trim on the windows and so on. So here we can see the fascia board on the gable. I tried putting a fascia board along the long edge here, and it doesn't need it. When the shingles are on there, the shingles will overhang that edge, and it actually looked worse with the fascia board on there, so I took it off. It'll only have fascia boards on the gables.
Well, you don't want to cover up your beautiful arches.
No, and it does. And then here's the frieze board.
Right.
And so the frieze board also forms a seal. It makes the roof fit tightly down onto the stone building and still slides right off. But this holds everything in alignment and keeps the light from leaking out, because we don't want the light from inside shining down on the outside of the building either.
No.
And so here on the long wall, I did have to add a frieze board, mostly just to fill in that gap.
Right.
So that the light wouldn't come pouring out of there and look silly.
Right.
And it keeps birds out too.
That's right, because we do have pigeons.
We do have pigeons. So here we have the inside of the building now with the roof in place and all the wiring in place, and the fascia boards on and everything. And I wanted to get in here and just look for light leaks. And everything's good and tight except right along the top of the roof cap. And there will be a cap that goes up there.
Right.
And that'll keep the light inside and outside. Will keep the light where it belongs. The light inside from the bulbs and the room lights from getting inside the building and looking, frankly, quite silly.
Right.
So a little green paint onto the trim, and that's looking pretty darn good.
It is.
One last little thing to do, glass in the windows.
Yes.
You know, that's such a small thing, but it adds so much depth.
Oh, it does.
You know, when there's no glass in there, it doesn't look that much different. But seeing the reflections in the glass and the light sort of bouncing off of there, it's a whole different look.
Right.
When you have, and of course I just used sheet acrylic
Right.
for this, as opposed to that thin floppy plastic that tends to warp and look silly. This is a nice rigid sheet acrylic, about 1 millimeter thick sheet acrylic, and that looks great.
I like the look. It's wonderful.
It's wonderful. I think we're ready to move on now and put some shingles on the roof.
Yep.
Build a cement floor for the whole thing.
There you go.
And we'll call it a building at that point. Well, we'll pick it up right here next week.
Okay.
2 last things to do, roof shingles and a cement floor.
Oh, and then we should have it.
And that should be just about it. A few other little things like some door hardware.
Oh, yes, knobs and,
doorknobs, and you're going to build some latches for the big locomotive doors. But the big thing left are the roof shingles and the cement floor.
Right.
Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, pop over to the channel, and if you're not a subscriber, click the blue button. Right there.
There it is.
There it is. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday with some sort of collectible.